Yeah.
Am I still getting
Yes.
flack for my
Yes.
Flag for your Mac.
flack for my Mac?
Yes.
Okay, here's our handout. I'm gonna start on the let's start with that.
I don't really care.
Okay, so last week we covered the seal judgments that begin in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. This week we're going to continue with what happens during that first 3.5 weeks. And we are not going to finish this week, but we are going to continue to talk about the trumpet judgments that come after the seal judgments. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned last week, you'll remember the seventh seal started and encompasses the 7 trumpets. All of that happens at the very beginning of the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. I broke it down last week into 2 periods where you have the tribulation, the first half, the great tribulation, which is the second half. We're going to continue to focus on this portion right here this morning. A lot is going on, not only spiritually, but on the earth. And then next week, that's where we're going to kind of focus, is what's going on in heaven after we see all the things that are going on the earth. So let's pick up where we left off. If you'll remember, the 7th seal in Revelation chapter 8, and when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven in about the space of an hour. The host of heaven had just worshipped the Father and the Lamb with a tremendous volume, and you'll see that in chapter 7 of Revelation 10 through 17. But when the Lamb opened that 7th seal, heaven was silent for a specific period of time. It said for about 30 minutes. Why 30 minutes? Is this literal? Is this figurative? Your guess is as good as mine. He doesn't tell us exactly why or what caused this silence, but it was certainly, this silence was almost a lull before the storm, because God is about to intensify the judgments that he's going to hurl upon the earth when he begins these 7 trumpet judgments. During the silence, 7 angels were given trumpets. It's significant to John because he was a Jew and he understood exactly what the trumpets in Israel's national history meant. And if we look back into Numbers, there was 3 uses for trumpets, important uses as a matter of fact. And if you can look at that in Numbers chapter 10, 1 through 10, the first one was, it was a call for the people to come together. A great way to herald people to come together. The second way was that it announced war. And finally, it announced a very special time. So this awesome silence here with the beginning of the trumpet, knowing something was going to happen, you could sincerely say that it encompassed all of those 3 things. War was about to begin. He was calling people together. He's going to also summon a special time that is about to begin on earth. Who are all of these judgments directed towards? I say this all the time because even though it will be a national disaster, a worldwide disaster, it's all directed for the Jews for a specific purpose of bringing them to God. Just as in the Old Testament where they wavered off, God would send judgment upon the Jews. They would send something. They would go down this path. God would give them a prophet and he would bring them back to center, bring them back to God. The same thing here. They have gone astray. God is using these judgments to bring them back to him. And each of it is a very tremendous. And like I said, it's going to continue to intensify with every trumpet that's blown and with the seals that were opened previously. In the tabernacle and the temple, the golden altar stood before the veil and was used for burning incense. And this was exactly what happened in the Old Testament when God gave the Israelites what they were supposed to do, the rituals that they were supposed to do in the temple. Now notice what he says here as the opening scene of what's going on. So after God gave them the angels their trumpet, he says, then another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hands. Then the angel took the censer filled it with fire from the altar, and he threw it to the earth. The scene that is now happening here before John's eyes and the vision that God has given him. We now have 7 angels with 7 trumpets. We now have an 8th angel that's standing in front of the altar, who is going to get some of the ash or some of the incense there, and he's going to offer it up. There's 2 questions that we have to ask ourselves that this verse of Scripture actually begs us to ask. One, it says here that in the smoke and incense with the prayers of the saints. Now this is interesting because I want you to think about who these saints are. It seems so minute, but it becomes very important as we go forward. Who would these saints be? Are there an elected group of people who have entered into sainthood? Anyone? What does the Bible say?
Aren't these the ones that died during is that the same people? That died during
The first half there
First
that he
half
said
of
we're
the
below the altar.
yeah. Is that the same people?
It's not. I mean, it could be. It could be. My question more specifically, though, are there individuals who are offered sainthood? The Catholic Church is very adamant about those being given into sainthood. Does the Bible say something about that?
Yes.
Yeah, we're called saints.
Yeah. They are.
Thank you. That's right.
The church.
All of us are saints. There's not an elect group of individuals who have done more or greater than another individual that these people are. We are all going to be offering prayers. That's very important when we look at this, because the next question has to be asked, what are they praying for? What are they praying for? What in the world would they be praying for? Are they praying for your soul here on earth? Something to think about, isn't it, Jacob? What in the world would these saints at the altar be praying for? Throw out some ideas. I had to think about this a while. What could you be praying for? If you're there at the altar, you're going to be praying for what?
Christ, the Lord.
That's a good start, I think.
But you gotta go back and the martyrs that were under the altar.
Mhm.
They're praying for vengeance. I mean, you read about them. They're praying that God will go, get retribution for them. Are these the same?
Okay, you're absolutely on the right track here. Absolutely on. There is absolutely, and let me clarify that, there is no place in the Bible that it teaches that people in heaven are praying for believers on earth. I really kind of thought someone would maybe take that hook and run with it, but we see no indication of that whatsoever in heaven. We pray to the Father through the Son, right? And He alone is worthy. So there is no indication anywhere in the Bible that you find that. But what we do find, and what was interesting as I went back and was looking at this, for years, centuries even, God's people have been praying the Lord's Prayer. How does that start off?
Father, who art in heaven.
And then it goes on and it says, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done. What's God's will here? I think the only thing that we can come to as a logical conclusion of what they were praying for is that God's will upon this earth will be accomplished. So they are crying for God to uphold His law and to vindicate His people. The same thing, like Bobby just said, those that were below the altar in last week's lesson when we seen in the fifth seal maybe, that they were sitting there praying for vengeance and for vindication for what has happened, right? The same thing that the church has been praying in the Lord's Prayer for hundreds of years. Thy will be done. So like it or not, we see here that the prayers of God's people are involved in the judgments that He sends. The throne and the altar are related very closely. The purpose of prayer has often been said that it's not to get man's will done in heaven, but to get God's will done on earth. Right? It's not about our will, it's about what God's will. God's will is final. Everyone to recognize He is God, to bring Him glory, and to bring all of this to fruition at the very end. Okay. Now then, the scene continues. The angels now prepare to sound the trumpets, and we're going to see that the first 4 trumpets, just to kind of summarize what we're going to talk about here, are judgment trumpets. They're natural in nature, that they're going to affect the land, the salt water, the fresh water, and the heavenly bodies. The 5th and 6th judgments that we're going to see are going to involve the release of some demonic forces that they torment and then they kill, and then the last trumpet judgment is going to create a crisis that's going to bring all nations into the world into some sort of subjection, I guess, if you will. So those are the 4. Now keep in mind, as I said last week, the seal judgments, once those 4 horsemen were released, they went out. We never see again in the Bible where they are called back. So once they are released, and we saw at one point last week, what was it, 1/4 of the population or 1/3? 1/4 of the population, wasn't it? 1/4 of the population was decimated, killed. Now he goes out, he is continuing. It wasn't on an immediate scale. It's not like that horse or that seal has to come to completion before the next seal is open. I grew up thinking that you opened one, it had to stop. You opened the 3rd, it had to go out and stop. That's not the case. As these 250,000 people that this first seal was talking about is going out, he is continuing to kill. So you see that happening as the trumpets are playing as well, even though he's been sent out after that seal was opened. So you're going to see here that it attacks, like I said, the natural wonders, and then as these things are happening in these trumpets, you're also going to see the the seals continuing to play out. So some of them may have correlation with some of the seals. I'm not certain how that's going to work out, but we know that that they're all happening simultaneously. Okay, so let's look at the first trumpet. When the first trumpet sounds, it says, "Hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grasses were burned up as well." Joel chapter 2, verse 30 and 31 also talks about this. This will be the fulfillment of that prophecy along with this one here. Obviously, the target of this judgment is the vegetation, right? Now, think about the implications if you have 1/3 of the vegetation burned up. 1/3. And what's interesting, and I found this to notice how the wording is specifically. It says 1/3 of all the trees were burned up, but how much of the green grass was burned?
All of it.
Take the Bible literal. Most commentators say it was 1/3 trees, 1/3 grass. But it says all of the grass. Now, do you look at this as in a specific area? I don't think so. I think we're talking about a worldwide disaster that's going to happen. Most of the world is going to feel the effects of this. You can only imagine how this is going to affect the balance of nature, the food supply. Think about that whenever we talked about the famines and the seals.
What about just oxygen?
What about just oxygen?
I mean,
So, this plays right along with that 4th seal, which is the reason I mentioned as you're opening the seals, these things are continuing to happen and pile up, and it's just getting worse by the second. Now, do you think people are just falling over their feet to figure out and try to get back to Christ?
no.
Probably not. I worry about everything else immediately that's happening.
The angel's fixing to show John exactly what people are doing. Hang on to that thought, because you would think that at this point there would be people that are saying, "Just take me now, just let me die," right? Just let me die. The second trumpet now sounds, and this trumpet affects all the salt water. It says, "Then the second angel sounded, And something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Note here that John didn't say this was an actual burning mountain, but he said that the fiery object was like a mountain. So a triple judgment now ensues after this comes to earth. Most commentators think it was a meteor that was coming down. Speculate as you will, I don't know. But a burning mountain being flown from heaven, I don't know. It could be a huge meteor. But notice the three things that happen. A third of the salt water is turned to blood. Not sure how that happens or what happens, if it turns to blood or if it looks like blood. We don't know. A third of the part of the marine life died. That's obviously going to be when you have a large meteor hit the ocean, it's going to kill a lot of the marine life that's there. A third of it, as a matter of fact. And a third of the ships that were destroyed. So this will be an ecological and economical disaster that's unprecedented in proportion. You will never have seen anything like this ever happen in history. So considering that the oceans occupy about 3/4 of the Earth's surface, you can only imagine the extent of this judgment. Right? The solution of the water and the death and so many creatures that would affect the balance of the ocean, this would undoubtedly lead to even further major problems when you see the oceans being affected like this. I want to also throw this into here because it seemed to be a general consensus out there. I don't know that it is my consensus or my opinion, but when it says here, notice that it says, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. Okay, it wasn't thrown into the ocean. Taking this literal, if you would have to do that, like I said, I don't think that he's going to cast one judgment and it be worldwide and then come back in and the second judgment be to a specific area. If we look at this as it being the sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, which is what, whenever they talk about it in the Old Testament, that's what they were talking about. However, this would make a relatively small impact on the world. Okay, so since the Mediterranean only covers about 970,000 square miles and is about 5,000 foot deep, it could be, it's probably not going to affect a lot of the salt water that you're talking about worldwide. So I would think that this is more of an oceanic thing than a Mediterranean Sea. Now then, the third judgment, the fourth, is this the fourth? Third, sorry. God's wrath next reaches inland and it touches the fresh water. So we now have, where it says Revelations 8 and 10, it says, the third angel sounded and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. So we've had the waters affected, we've had the vegetation affected, and now the salt water, the vegetation, and now we're going to look at and see that the fresh water is affected. So God's wrath reaches inland now, and it touches all the fountains, all the rivers, making fresh water taste like wormwood. Does anybody have any knowledge of wormwood in the Bible? It's mentioned multiple times in the Bible, but it's very bitter. Very bitter, and it says that the water could produce death. So it's a third of the waters now that have become polluted by this meteor or something that is coming out that is now polluted the water that's going to produce death. So if some people who drink of these waters were in danger of dying, what must happen to the fish and the other creatures that were also in the water? They're probably going to die as well. Have you ever been around a pond that's been turned over? Carter Harrison used to have a fish farm, so a king cat. And at the time, if a pond ever turned over and all those fish, it means that all the fish there died, it ranked. It was awful. You could not stand around the place. Can you imagine the stench that's going on now? Because we remember from the seals, we have poverty, we have famine, we have plagues, people dying. We have now the salt water with a third of all the fish. We have the fresh water with all those fish that are now killed. The stench is just going to be incredibly bad.
Jeremy, I worked at a fish farm whenever I was in high school, and one one of the ponds turned over, and it was probably 15 foot wide, but about 100 feet long. And it was koi fish, and it turned over on a Saturday. We found it on a Monday morning, and we had to seine the rest of the living fish out from under about 3 inches of maggots and dead fish.
It's awful. It is. It's the stink
was-
is awful.
It was the worst experience, and I've dealt with a lot of bad smells. It was the worst smell I think I've ever dealt with.
I just can't imagine what the stench is going to be here. But more than that, think about the food source that's going to be taken away from the world. So you can see how not only the seal judgments, where you're looking at poverty and famine, are going to going along with the trumpet judgments at the same time. All of this happens in the first 3.5 years. You're talking about catastrophe. And when I ask you, do you think people are turning to the Lord left and right? And most of you said, probably not. No, they're too focused on their physical beings. They're trying to stay alive. Remember, they're running for the caves because they're worried about what's going to fall on their head from the sixth seal, right? They're worried about just living. Now, on the fourth trumpet, the judgments from the first 3 trumpets affected only a third part of the land and waters, but this fourth trumpet is going to affect, even though it says a third of the earth, it's going to affect the entire world. And it says, and why is that? I did not put the scripture verse up here. Does anybody have that open that they can read that? The fourth trumpet.
The fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. Then I looked, and I heard an angel. You stop there with the eagle.
Yeah. So a third of the sun, a third of the moon, a third of the stars will be affected part of this. Now then, you take a third of the sun away from the earth, what happens?
It's cold and dark.
You darn right it does. Third of the moon, third of the stars. This is going to be a worldwide effect. Now this is a temporary judgment. This is the only one that I can find that is a temporary judgment. It is not something that is going to continue until the end of time. This one is temporary, and we see that because in Revelation 16 and 8, in the fourth bowl judgment, the sun's power will be intensified, and then at the close of the tribulation, the sun and moon will be darkened again completely to announce the Savior's return. So if we look forward, and of course y'all didn't have that knowledge of that, but if you look forward and read forward, you see that the sun comes back and is intensified later on. So yes, like you said, even though a third of the sun will be darkened, a third of the moon, it's going to affect the entire earth, because you take a third of the power source of the world away. The sun is huge when you talk about power sources. When you take a third of that away, it's going to be dramatic for the entire world. The temperature change on the earth is going to affect the way things grow. It's going to affect the way we live. So this will be a national or a worldwide disaster. One of the only few that I can find that's going to be temporary. Now things change a little bit. I know I'm rushing through this because the last several are going to take much more time. At this point, a remarkable messenger appears in the sky. He's proclaiming 3 woes. So with the 5th trumpet, we have 3 woes. So you're going to have the 5th trumpet, the 6th trumpet, and the 7th trumpet are also woe judgments. Okay, so they are parallel to one another. He appears and he proclaims the woes to the earth's inhabitants. Most manuscripts read here as it's an eagle instead of an angel. Whichever manuscript yours has, the intent is the same, as to get people's intentions. So the 3 woes in Revelation 8 and 13 refer to the judgments that are yet to come. Remaining 3 angels then blow their trumpets. Here's the key to this. His announcement, that angel or that eagle, basically is saying, if you think it's been bad so far, just wait. It's getting worse. Can you imagine now how many people have died? Imagine the stench. We've talked about that. But yet, here in the woe judgments, he's saying, you ain't seen nothing yet. Okay? It's going to get worse. The worst is yet to come. The 5th trumpet, the first one blows. If you want to read Revelation 9, 1 through 12, you most certainly can. If I have just a few minutes here. As a matter of fact, I do want to read it. Chad, would you read 9, 1 through 12?
Yep. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. He opened the bottomless pit, and the smoke went out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given to them as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were told not to hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were not permitted to kill anyone, but to torment for 5 months. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings a man. And in those days men will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, and death flees from them. The appearance of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads appeared to be crowns like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots and of many horses rushing to battle. They have tails like scorpions and stings, and in their tails is their power to hurt men for 5 months. What, go through 12?
That's fine. Yeah, let's just stop right there. That's good. Thank you, Chad. I want you to notice a couple of things here pretty quickly. Notice that this is not an actual star. When we talked about the stars previously that were falling, or that something was falling out, that very well was a meteor, right? We can logically think about that. But when we talk about this is not a star, but this is a star, because it says, for to him was given what? Keys to the bottomless pit. Now, if you can use your imaginations for just a few minutes, who possibly could have the keys to the bottomless pit? And who has also ever been called the morning star? Lucifer. Satan. So here, we're going to see a star that was given the keys to the bottom of the pit. Notice that he is also the king over the beings in the pit. If you look at verse 11 in chapter 9, he doesn't have complete authority because the keys had to be given to him. It's very interesting when you start breaking these down, because obviously Satan doesn't have that kind of authority. He has a lot of authority, but someone gave him the keys. And remember as well that right now Satan has access to the throne of God. He goes to the throne of God. He can come back and roar, seeking to devour who he can on earth. Now that's an interesting thought, to think that God, or that Satan can go and approach God's throne. And if you think that that's a crazy thought, read the book of Job, because Satan went to God. Where is God? Satan's not limited to just here on earth. He very well can go and approach God right now, which, when we get a little farther on, you're going to see that he's cast out of heaven. If he's cast out, then that means he can no longer come back. So Satan has access to the throne of God and to speak with God at this time. So he doesn't have complete authority because he was given the keys to loose this army. The star is probably, like I just said, or like someone just said, Lucifer or Satan and his army of demons. When the pit was opened, smoke emerged as though the door of a furnace had been loosened. Jesus compared hell to the furnace of a fire. If you look in Matthew chapter 13, you can see exactly what hell feels like, or what Jesus describes it as. An image that really kind of ought to make us all just stop and think, holy cow, there's no way that we want anyone to go to hell. But the smoke polluted the air and darkened the sun, which had already been darkened when the fourth trumpet sounded. But this is what came out of the smoke that they tried to terrorize mankind. It was an army of demons compared to locusts. But did you happen to understand what Chad said whenever he described these locusts? This is just a picture that someone portrayed, if you can see that up there now, of kind of sort of what it could be. But if you look in chapter 9, verse 7, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as if the crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth was as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as if it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months.
And then weren't allowed to die.
I don't know. Did it say
No,
that?
Yeah, it says they will seek death and will not
the
find.
men,
So there you go. Yeah.
the men will,
Seek death.
and it will flee from them.
There were three groups that were exempt from this torment of these demons. Who were the first?
Grass.
What?
Grass.
Grass.
Trees.
Yeah, three people. I'm sorry, three things. So first of all is trees. What do locusts normally eat?
They eat
Grass, leaves, right? So that was exempt, which good because if you go back, if we take it literal, all the grass has already been gone, right? But they were exempt from eating that. Who were the second group or things that they could not harm?
Any green thing.
Okay, so let's group that with the first one.
The
Who
men
else?
with the mark on their foreheads.
Who would that be?
Christians.
Thank you. During that time, Christians. There's one more group. Did I only put two, or did I put three? on that?
Three.
I put three. The 144,000. You remember they were sealed from any torment from the devil. They're protected. Those 144,000 that we talked about with the sixth seal are protected. 12,000 from each tribe of Israel are protected. So you have those groups who will not be affected by this particular judgment. The normal lifespan of a locust, if you look it up and Google it, it says 5 months. It's the length of time that this judgment will last. It has a starting point, it has a stopping point. These demons will sting people, and this creature will create such pains that they will want to die, but they will not be able to. There you go, y'all just read that. Reading the description here of these creatures, we realize that John was not writing about any kind of ordinary locust. The symbolism here portrays a very powerful enemy. And if we think about the battle, how many men here did it say that they would have? 200 million? Is that what it said? I'm sorry. Is that right? No, that's the next one. I'm jumping ahead. I apologize. But the symbolism here is to interpret that the light in modern warfare is what's going to be going on. And there's going to be a huge battle that the devil is going to bring with him, who they are going to be following Satan completely. And they are going to be destroyers, and they are going to torture as they come along. Now let's look at the sixth trumpet. This is where we're going to stop because we can't go any farther this morning. And I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound in the great river Euphrates." If you want to, read chapter 9, verse 13 through 19 to get a better description here. But here we have, again, to set the stage, at the golden altar of the incense, the angel offered prayers for the saints. Again, this is what he's offering. The same altar voice speaks, commanding these 4 angels be loosed. Now, are these good angels or bad angels? Bad angels. Why do you say that, Chad? What leads you to believe that?
They kill a third of mankind.
They kill a third of mankind, but also they are loosed. Good angels are not held captive anywhere. So we see that they were loosed from the river Euphrates. Here's where I was jumping ahead. I apologize if I got the two mixed up. How many people are in their army?
200 million.
200 million. This army is released with these 4 angels that come up out of the river Euphrates. They're wicked. 200 million with them. They're going to be released at a precise time, which was interesting to me because there's very little in Revelations that gives you a precise time of what's going to happen. We can compare the book of Daniel with Revelations and get some sort of a general time frame, but this gives us a precise time for when this is going to happen. For a specific purpose, they're going to kill, not just torment, a third of the world's population. Is that the first bill or the second bill? Okay, I want to finish one thing. Y'all just bear with me here. This means that half of the world's population at this time is completely gone. How many did we have at the first? The first one was killed, a quarter, right? So we have a quarter of the world's population was killed at the very beginning. Does anybody have any idea how many people are in the world?
7 billion.
7.7 as I checked this morning as of December 2nd is what it said. 7.7 billion people in the world. Let's talk about how many people are now no longer existent. 7.7 billion people in the world. How many Christians do you think are in the world as of today? So this would be the people that were raptured, per se. And this is generalized because we don't really know. We just know these are professing Christians. If we take every one of them and they all go to heaven, how many would you guess? Out of this 7.7 billion people?
1.5.
1.5, that's a really good guess. Take it a little higher. 2.2.
2.6.
So 7.7 minus 2.2 gives us 5.5 billion people left after the rapture. Right? 5.5 billion people left after the rapture. Now then, if you take another third of the population, which we have right here that was killed, a third of 5.5 is, so you don't have to do the math, it's going to leave us 1.65 billion people on the earth after these things have happened. 200 million of those are in Satan's army. So that leaves us now 2.8, so that's going to be 1.45 billion that are left. You take 144,000 out of that, you're still going to be at about 1 billion people left on earth. You've taken the world's population from 7 billion to 1.45 billion people. That's a huge reduction in the world's population from the rapture to we have not even gotten to the halfway point of the tribulation period. What do you think people are concerned about? They're not concerned about us going to heaven, who's already been left. Because John tells us here in just a few more minutes, and I'm not going to cover that, we're going to have to pick it up next week. They're going to start worshiping Satan. Isn't that crazy? Blows my mind that they would rather worship Satan than die for Jesus Christ. And that's what happens with most of the population left. That 1.45 billion people. Crazy. Okay, I have nothing else. I know I've kept you too long. We'll pick up there next week with the 6th trumpet. I want to talk a little bit more about what's going on here. We'll pick up with the 7th as well. So, quick prayer and then we'll dismiss.